Them Fifi.
In 2010, the tabloids were apoplectic when they were 22 years late in discovering that a young script editor, who talked about overthrowing the Conservative government during his job interview, had allowed a tyrannical parody of the Iron Lady onto the programme.
Why? For the good of the majority.
Doctor Who has been in something of a critical and ratings death spiral for some time now, a situation that will be all too familiar to anyone old enough to remember watching in the late 1980s, up to the point when it was quietly cancelled after an initial run of 26 years. And history appears to be repeating itself in more ways than one, because just as in the twilight years of classic era Who, the current creative team appear to have consciously conspired to sneak political propaganda into the story directly under the noses of their BBC paymasters. And just like in the 1980s, no one seems to have particularly noticed. And to clarify, I'm not talking about the sort of heavy-handed identity politics messaging that has seen audiences abandon Doctor Who in their millions.
We know everything, thanks.
And you know nothing? Shame you're not a woman anymore.
She'd have understood. Something a male-presenting Time Lord will never understand.
I'm talking about the sort of partial political pro-Palestine and anti-Israel dog whistles that presumably the higher-ups at Anti might struggle to justify in the context of their royal charter. And given that the episode in question was broadcast directly between two primetime political hot potatoes, it's surprising that there wasn't more of a fuss. But then again, seemingly there really are increasingly fewer people watching to care. So, for the uninitiated, the Interstellar Song Contest is the 6th episode of the second season of Disney Plus era Doctor Who. Billed as essentially Eurovision meets Die Hard in space, it was broadcast on the BBC's Saturday night schedule immediately after the FA Cup final and immediately prior to this year's actual Eurovision Song Contest. And as a tidy tie-in, Doctor Who himself, Ncuti Gatwa, was lined up to present the UK jury results live via satellite. Whilst Die Hard featured criminals posing as terrorists in an attempt to steal millions, the Interstellar Song Contest involved actual terrorists attempting to murder a music audience of trillions. Said terrorists were horned humanoids from the planet Helia, led by the Kid. Hi. And early into the episode, they appear to execute thousands in the contest arena by sucking them into space. Initially, we get hints that the Helians are evil, untrustworthy, practice cannibalism, and are responsible for the destruction of their own planet. But it soon becomes clear that they have been misrepresented by an all-powerful evil corporation as propagandistic cover for the genocide of Helia's entire population. A genocide done simply to harvest the planet's poppy fields for use in a corporation product called poppy honey.
Your planet was invaded for honey.
My planet was invaded for honey flavoring.
Indeed, it even transpires that the Kid is simply called the Kid because as a baby his mother was murdered in front of him before she could even give him a name.
I'm only doing the things you expect of me.
Hurt people, and consequently, the genocide survivors turn terrorists, seek revenge, and consider the trillions tuning into the contest as legitimate targets on the basis that the corporation and their poppy honey product are the official sponsors of the Interstellar Song Contest. Inevitably, the Doctor saves the day and even manages to bring all the arena victims back to life. The terrorists are remanded in custody, and noticeably, apart from one significant scene that we'll get to, and despite the magnitude of their murderous intent, they are ultimately portrayed much more sympathetically than the common criminals in Die Hard, who killed a total of 13 people before being brutally dispatched themselves. Meanwhile, it transpires that Song Contest favourite Cora is also a Helian, who hid her heritage so that she could participate in the song contest. And at the end, she is permitted to sing the song of her home planet, lamenting the genocide caused by the corporation, and thus signalling that Helia are the ultimate victors of the 803rd Interstellar Song Contest. In allegorical terms, Helia clearly appears to be Palestine. And so back in the real world, their moral victory was looking all the more significant a few hours later.
New day will rise. Everyone cries. Don't cry alone.
When Israel came just one result away from winning the 69th edition of the Eurovision Song Contest.
It has all come down to this.
In the end, they had to settle for second, as well as a not always welcome reception. Because in recent years, Israel's involvement in the contest have led to protests and calls to ban them over their military action in Gaza. Significantly, Eurovision have also come under pressure to drop their current sponsors, Moroccan Oil, who are an Israeli-owned company accused of manufacturing their products in a factory built in occupied Palestinian territories. So by the time you take in the significance of poppies in Palestinian culture and the fact that the contested territories have been referred to as the land of milk and honey, parallels to the poppy-honey sponsorship plotline really do start to jump out. Quite a lot of viewers did pick up on this, although in the post-broadcast chatter, not everyone agreed that the messaging should be interpreted as anti-Israel. Some felt it took a both sides stance, while even more perceived the story to be pro-Israel, largely due to the significant scene I alluded to earlier, when, extremely uncharacteristically for the Doctor, he sadistically tortured the male genocide surviving terrorist.
How many people did you want to kill? 3 trillion?
Almost to the point of death, before leaving him in the custody of the corporation's robot drones, and departing the scene without exacting any sort of justice or retribution for their genocidal acts. Predictably for Doctor Who, the social justice messaging in the episode is certainly muddled. But if Israel are intended to be one aspect of an allegory, then they appear to be the aspect that is portrayed as an evil, all-powerful corporation with no apparent redeemable characteristics. A corporation that controls the media and is guilty of an act of genocide, motivated purely by profit and greed. I'm from Ireland and grew up in a nation divided along religious and political grounds. I understand the sectarian siege mentality that drives people to exclusively champion one side of a conflict over the other, even when it requires ignoring inconvenient truths, and essentially demonising large swathes of people simply for being perceived to be on the other side. I understand that Europe has a dark and shameful history concerning Jewish people, and I also understand that Palestinian Arabs have experienced catastrophe and forcible displacement. I understand that the October 7th attacks were horrific, as have the subsequent deaths and displacement of thousands of Palestinian civilians in the besieged Gaza Strip. I support free speech and the rights of artists to say whatever they choose, even in instances where I personally perceive their messaging to be somewhat distracting, derivative, potentially discriminatory, and or suspiciously performative. But I also agree with former showrunner Stephen Moffat's view that political propaganda of whatever persuasion rarely makes good TV.
I don't particularly think politics should be smuggled into to any kind of show. You're here to tell the truth as best you can and tell stories that are meaningful as best you can. How you vote is a very, very low resolution version of how you think, choosing one side or the other. I mean, if you did that, if you just smuggled politics in, as you put it, you'd be writing nothing but propaganda. And propaganda, even propaganda in a good cause, is always bad drama.
And besides, is it really too much that writers have the courage of their convictions and own whatever message it is they seek to send? In fairness, scriptwriter Juno Dawson did somewhat cryptically claim on social media that the episode was all political, obviously, but we certainly haven't received the sort of behind-the-scenes lecture that showrunner Russell T Davies dished out the week that the Doctor ran into a planet full of white supremacists.
It'll be interesting to see the response to this episode. I think the main response to this episode is going to be about the ending. What we can't tell is how many people will have worked that out before the ending, because they've seen white person after white person after white person. And television these days is very diverse. Now, I wonder, will you be 10 minutes into it? Will you be 15? Will you be 20? Before you start to think everyone in this community is white. And if you don't think that, why didn't you? So that's going to be interesting.
Presumably the episode was largely written before the tragic events of autumn 2023. Nevertheless, disputes around Israel's involvement in the song contest have been going on since at least 2019, which was the same year that Moroccan Oil began their sponsorship. By the time the episode was actually filmed in the spring of 2024, debate around Israel's actions in Gaza and their participation in the 2024 competition had become extremely political, obviously. And it does seem somehow inconceivable that the team behind the episode didn't pause to consider the potential sensitivities around how their story might be perceived. Perhaps the bizarre torture scene was bolted on late in the day as some sort of attempt at both sides' balance. Or perhaps the production was simply political, obviously, all along. When script editor Andrew Cartmel admitted to deliberately injecting contemporary politics into 80s era Who, he lamented the fact that no one noticed, stating that critics, media pundits and politicians certainly didn't pick up on what we were doing. If we had generated controversy and became a cause celeb, we would have got a few more viewers. But sadly, nobody really noticed or cared. So, I wonder, could Russell T Davis's team have started out with similar intentions? And could they even perhaps have suffered a late-stage loss of nerve? At least when it came to clarifying exactly what was so obviously political about Juno Dawson's script. Because at the start of this video, I mentioned that the Interstellar Song Contest was broadcast directly between not one, but two primetime political hot potatoes. Clearly, they would have been aware of the political sensitivities around the programme their episode was deliberately scheduled to precede. What they couldn't have predicted was that by the day of broadcast, the presenter of the cup final before them would be bang in the middle of a row about perceived anti-Semitic messaging that directly led to his exit from the BBC the following week. Neither, presumably, could they have possibly predicted the unforeseen circumstances that required the BBC to issue a statement denying speculation that Doctor Who's last-minute withdrawal from the Real World Contest had anything whatsoever to do with Israel getting to sing their song. So what do you think? Am I reading too much into it? Or did Russell T Davis deliberately step into a space where even more edgy sci-fi satire tread very carefully indeed?
What the hell is Israel?
It's just something Rick starts talking about when he's blackout drunk.
What? In what way? Like, what's my point?
In a way that has no point? You just babble about defense budgets in the United Nations and then you pass out.
So, to be clear, I sometimes reference the geopolitical complexities of the topic, which is not the same as going to an anti-Semitic place.
I have no stake in this.
I don't either. I'm just saying, if anything, the drunk version of me is probably so supportive of Israel. He wants what's best for it, and...
Hey man, I'm not touching this. You do you.
Can't you see it too? There is an elephant in the room.